Okay, first engine start then. So a couple of quick bits before we actually turn the key. I've now got heat insulation over the fuel lines here, and I've also got it over the oil cooler lines as well. So I haven't shortened the steel pipes yet and lengthened the flexi pipes for the oil cooler. I want to make sure these olives seal where they are. Obviously the pipe's quite old, it's a little bit pitted, cleaned up as best possible. What I really didn't want to do is go and shorten the steel pipes, lengthen the flexis and find out it wouldn't seal where that position was. If it seals here, when I get onto road testing things, I'll check to see what temperature's like of those oil cooler pipes, even with the insulation around them, and then make a call on whether I change those or not at that point in time. So everything's connected. I haven't got any LPG stuff in at the moment. Got the strobe light ready so I can do a very rough setting of ignition timing just so the engine will run nicely. What you don't want is really retarded timing because the exhaust manifolds start glowing. So we need to get that somewhere near right. What you'll see me do is, once I'm happy I've got oil pressure, etc. Well, sorry, the oil pressure light's gone out. You'll hear the hydraulic tappets will be a little bit noisy. We'll just blip the throttle a little bit just to make sure they're spinning, get a little bit of oil pressure around them. Once they start going quieter and things like that, I'll actually start raising the revs up. What we don't want to do is just hold it at 2000 RPM consistently. We need cylinder pressure to actually bed the piston rings in. We're not really going to generate enough cylinder pressure here, just blipping the throttle. We need to go down the road and get some load on the engine there. If you want a dyno cell or something, you'd actually load the engine up to do that and keep it at 2000 RPM at the same time. That would be ideal. Not going to put a dyno in this garage, although ideas. Anyway, no, let's not do that. So yeah, we'll do that. We'll keep popping underneath, making sure we haven't got any leaks, etc. Keep blipping the throttle and keeping an eye on things. Obviously change the power steering pump on this because we've changed the front end to intermediate serpentine from the earlier V-belt. So I will need to top the power steering fluid up and bleed that through at the same time. Lots going on when you first start the engine. We need to make sure the thermostat housing opens up. We need to make sure the water level doesn't drop. All sorts going on. No time to talk to the camera. I'll show you a little bit of it and then we'll jump back to the camera after we've actually done it. So I think that's it. Let's go. So this is me just cranking the engine over a couple of times just to make sure that everything turns over, there's no nasty clunks before we go to start it. Okay, so everything's fine on cranking over, no untoward noises. Just going to reconnect the EFI system and we'll go for first fire up. Oil light's gone out. So the engine's sounding very laboured straight away, generally retarded ignition timing, so I'm just going to adjust the distributor by hand just to get things a little bit better. Quick top up of power steering fluid because as you can hear the pump is starting to pour air in through.
Because at this point I start to hear a slightly metallic noise, so you can see in a second I remove the oil fill cap just to see if it gets louder with that off, see if it's up the top end, which it wasn't. Yeah, so it's only happening at certain RPMs, so that's what I'm starting to look at on the passenger side of the vehicle. So just after this I actually got the stethoscope and started listening to the engine, and I found out what the little noise was, which I'll explain in just a few seconds. Here you can see I'm just checking the water pipe to go to the vaporizer to make sure everything's getting warm there, circulation through the heater matrix obviously, and to the vaporizer. Also, I just double checked the two small hoses that are on the top of the rad. They're the small 8mm ID hoses that come from the inlet manifold and from the rad to the header tank. So essentially, you saw me check my watch earlier on. Just keep doing this for the next sort of 20 minutes, keeping an eye on everything until 20 minutes is up, everything's well up to temperature. Supposedly at that point the camshaft is broken in. So yeah, that's generally what I do. Okay, really pleased with how that went. The eagle-eyed amongst you will note the dipstick is up and out. So the only tiny little issue I have right now is a little bit frustrating because the sump's probably got to come off to correct it. Yeah, the dipstick is touching the crankshaft or conrods. I forget exactly where it lines up with. I could probably look on one of these engines around here, but I'm not going to bother. So yeah, I need to correct that. You can actually hear it if you just, when you get to about there, you can actually feel it just contacting, but I missed that on assembly, unfortunately. Naughty me. So yeah, pulling the dipstick out to here means it's not contacting the crank and there's no noise. So that's why that's up. I'm not going to cover it up. It's a thing. It means it needs correcting. Everything else has gone really well. Done the cam brake in. Engine's now idling nicely. If I swing around here, we can fire it up. I'm only going to fire it up for a very split second because the doors are shut again on the garage. But there we are. We're back up and running. We've got a lovely idle speed, although I've got to go through and do an EFI setup on it anyway. So yeah, really pleased. What I'm now going to get into is the reinstating the LPG system and doing the upgrade. So we've got a Bosch 4.6 airflow meter to go in place here. That does mean this intake hose has to change, and because we've got an LPG mixer to slot in here as well, this all gets a bit tight. So I may go with a 90 silicon and then rotate this box round to create a different line here, changing the bracketry, or I might order a stainless steel 60-degree bend and then have a reducer here to deal with the size difference, and then just a straight piece of hose here onto the 60-degree pipe. I think it's probably my preferred method. I'll still have to jiggle about with the brackets for the air box, I think. So yeah, that needs to happen, and also emulator wiring. These boxes are unplugged at the moment. I'm going to splice that into the EFI loom back here and back here, because originally it was on the piggyback emulator loom here, which just means there's a mass of wires down this side, which I really didn't like the look of. So going to correct that. I'm going to start having a look at air conditioning pipe work. I'm really struggling to find pipes that will go on the condenser down here. That's my biggest headache at the moment. I think I found a kit that does the crimp connections, which allow me to convert from the old V-belt pump to the serpentine. But yeah, that's kind of my biggest stumbling point on the aircon at the moment. What else have I got to do? Well, let's just see where we get to in this video, shall we? Emulator wiring then. So this is how it was originally. With the emulators piggybacked. So the way this works is the EFI loom The petrol loom comes in here, plugs into the emulator loom. The wiring then shoots back to the emulator, and then if it's in petrol mode, it comes back and then goes down to the injector. So you've got this piggyback arrangement. Lots of plugs, nothing wrong with this at all. Works perfectly fine. It's the way a lot of LPG conversions are done. Certainly they were. So you know, it's a nice simple solution, and obviously it means you can remove it very easily if you're fault diagnosing and want to just run the petrol side of things and rule out an emulator fault or anything along those lines. However, this looks far neater. So as you can see, it's just the standard wiring loom plugged into the injectors. All I've done back here in the loom is I've spliced in, let you know if you can see it, down here I've spliced in the emulator loom to the EFI loom. So obviously it's still reversible, although it would mean, you know, going into the loom and desoldering, joining wires back up, but it's still reversible if Joe ever did want to just have petrol on the car. Or you could even make up little loop wires here where the emulator plugs in. The emulator doesn't actually need any power at all for it to run in petrol mode. So I've got my earth wire and my blue LPG wire here at the moment disconnected. The car will run up on 8 cylinders, no problem at all, because the emulator's default is to run the petrol injectors. I'm gonna call it a day on this video here. So the next job for me is airflow meter tubing, wiring in the emulators this side. I'm just going to pop the plenum off for that, just for a bit more access. And obviously the doomsday dipstick, as I'm going to call it right now. Yeah, so just realised I've got my breather pipe off. Look, I did that while I was doing some wiring. Pop that back on there. Yeah, conclude this video here. Next one will be with this on. And more progress. I've also found the viscous coupling on here is not as good as I'd like it to be. It's a bit free play. It's stiff to turn initially, but it does not take much at all to free off. And the worst thing is once it's freed off, it is, don't know if it's going to pick up, but I've got wobble. So got another one of those on its way. And obviously I also need to sort out the radiator cowl because that doesn't fit at the moment. So I think we're going to do some hacking and maybe even some fiberglassing on that. We'll see where we go. So thanks for watching. Subscribe, like, comment, dislike if you don't like it. Comment, keep them constructional. I don't mind negative comments as long as they're you know, can sort of, oh, why don't we do this or instead of that, or everyone's got their opinion. Yeah, more on the LPG work in the next video, and airflow meter upgrade, that sort of thing. Cheers guys, catch you later.